All right, hello, welcome back, everybody. PayPal and Patreon are down below if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. So, doing something I realized I had not actually done before, and that is going down the list of U.S. oil production by state. And although it's a body of water and not a state, obviously the Gulf of Mexico is going to be included as one. So, going down the list. The largest oil producer within the US among states is obviously still Texas. Before the shale output began in the late 2000s, Texas had declined down over time from the millions down towards about 1.1 million barrels per day. It has since, because of production from the Eagle Ford shale partially, which has flattened out now and will be going down in a few years, and the Permian Shale, which is also peaking at the moment, but will drag on for a bit longer. Texas has been brought back up to a total of about 5.8 million barrels per day. Most of that is from those two shale formations primarily, although underlying that, following its depletion curve beforehand, conventional oil production in Texas from original regular oil fields is should at the moment be down to around between 700 and 800,000 barrels per day. So between 10 and 15% of Texas's oil production is still coming from older conventional onshore oil fields. The second largest producer within the US is New Mexico, the neighboring state of Texas that shares the Permian. Before shale production began 2 decades ago, New Mexico had declined down in conventional production to about or a bit under 200,000 barrels per day. And following its descent or declination curve, as of right now, 20 years later, it's likely down to around 100,000 barrels per day of conventional production left, leaving the other 2.1 million barrels per day being comprised of shale oil from the Permian Shale Formation, with New Mexico's total at 2.2 million barrels per day currently. Gulf of Mexico has gradually oscillated its way upwards over time and keeps coming close to around 2 million, but has only touched it a few times. At the moment, it's hanging out a bit under it at around 1.8 million barrels per day. North Dakota comes in next, bearing most of the Bakken Shale Formation. And before the Bakken, North Dakota was down to about only 80,000 barrels per day of conventional oil production, once being up in the hundreds, lower hundreds at least. And by now, following its curve, its conventional output is likely pretty much zero. So everything that's coming out of North Dakota is just Bakken shale oil, most recently being at 1.15 million barrels per day. My home, my state, Alaska, where I used to live through most of the 2010s up until 2020. Since then, I've been living in exile down in the southeastern US. Alaska got up to about 2 million barrels per day at its height decades ago and had declined all the way down to only about 300,000. However, in the time since then, we have been gradually moving westward away from Prudhoe Bay and adding new fields here and there, as there are some moderate ones. Every couple of miles you go, there's one here that's 80,000 barrels per day worth, one here that's 15, another over here that's worth 45. And adding those over time has gradually brought Alaska back up to right around 500,000 or 500,000 barrels per day. And there are a number of larger projects that will be coming online in the next few years. One is 80,000. The next largest producer is just a little bit below that. Colorado is at 450, with almost all of that being comprised of shale oil from the Niobrara Shale Formation, which underlies Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. And then just another 50 down below that is Oklahoma, who, after a high of close to 500,000 in the 80s, declined down to around 175 before the shale boom happened. And since then, given their decline curve, their conventional oil output is probably down to around maybe 75. So most of their output is comprised of shale oil from the Anadarko Shale, which predominantly underlies Oklahoma. And currently, Oklahoma is usually around 400 Next in for them, dropping down by 100 to a current average of 300,000 barrels per day. Wyoming, given their declination curve beforehand, is likely down pretty close to zero for remaining conventional oil output, and its 300,000 barrels per day is almost entirely from the Niobrara Shale. California, once up at 1.1 million barrels per day at its height, had ran through what there was onshore at least, and has been going through its depletion over time, now seeing itself decline all the way down under 300,000 to around 270 now. Utah, also primarily driven by Niobrara Shale, is at around 200,000 at the moment. Its conventional production is probably maybe around 40, 30,000. And then from there, everybody else starts getting pretty negligible. Ohio still comes in above 100, being primarily driven by enhanced oil capture from the otherwise mostly natural gas coming out of the Appalachia Shale Formation. They're at about 140. Louisiana, at its height back in the 80s, hit about 600,000 barrels per day. Now they've declined with time to around 80 or 90,000. Kansas declined down to 75 now from its height of about 200,000 back in the 80s and is entirely conventional, just like California and Louisiana. So it's going to keep heading its way downwards to depletion. Montana was already pretty close to zero, but then the Bakken Shale happened, and it does share a portion of that with North Dakota, just not that much of it. And different portions of it have been tapped at different times over the last 20 years, seeing resurgences and abrupt drops, resurgences and abrupt drops. We just came off of another resurgence thanks to higher oil prices driven by the Ukraine war, and they came up to about 75,000 again. Everyone else below them is below 50,000. Mississippi is down to 28,000 barrels per day. Illinois is down to 20. Michigan got close to 100,000 barrels per day once. Now they're down to 12. All right, that's it for this one. So thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal and Patreon are down there if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you around next time.